Those of you who have been disciples of the ascended masters through the temple of the presence have long been encouraged to identify yourselves with your own Christ presence, especially in that concept of putting on that garment of the Christ light, the white light, Christ righteousness, the vehicle of consciousness that you know as that glorious Christ presence. Likewise, you have had your attention drawn to the divine ideal of acknowledging that the truth of your selfhood rests completely within your own individual mighty I Am presence, and that here as well, your individuality utilizes a vehicle of consciousness, that which is known to you as the electronic body of your mighty I Am presence. And to some degree, you are beginning to appreciate how it is that you may elevate your attunement and invite the outpouring of that mighty I Am presence to stream through the formative chalice of your own four lower bodies and blessed heart. Now, if you have not yet truly begun to do so, it is also time for you to begin to realize that there is another vehicle of consciousness that you may call your own, that is truly home to you as well, and that this is also likened unto a garment that you may wear, that you may put on and utilize as a vehicle of your own heart's expression, just as you would the garment of the Christ. This is done in ways that may seem deceptively simple, but they are nonetheless true. They have to do with a certain current of life resonating through the four lower bodies, so that your consciousness, your conscious awareness, while alert and awake, can be elevated in attunement, in vibration, in a certain resonance of harmony, so that there begins to settle in through and around your outer awareness more and more of the dawning consciousness that is your own blessed causal body. When the album of this conference is assembled, we shall include the original releases of the announcement of this class, for there is not time to expend that much retracing all that was released in those initial releases. By way of summary, you might remember that part of the concept was symbolized by the descent of a life stream into the so-called underworld, which was portrayed to be after physical death took place, but in fact, it was a description of the descent into this earthly incarnation, and how certain heroes are shown to have been invited to take a seat in that underworld. And as they positioned themselves in that seat in an unsuspecting way, lo and behold, they were rendered immobile. They were rendered actually frozen, not only in that position, but perhaps more importantly for our purposes here, they were fixed in that moment of time, not of eternity, but that moment of time, and could have remained there indefinitely were it not for the intercession of certain ones coming along and striving to reawaken them. That is actually what has happened to the entire race of mankind. They have come into embodiment and actually become so fixated in their attention, pouring that attention down and out into this outer world of form, becoming so entirely engrossed in this world of form as to, for all intents and purposes, from the vantage point of their own God presence, sit frozen in time and bereft of the blessings of the divine memory, the memory of God that goes on and on in eternity. Let us see if we can actually take a little object lesson of what this would mean in our case here in this world. Let us, for the sake of argument, theorize that you are the son or daughter of very wealthy parents and are yourself the inheritor of vast amounts of wealth. There are bank accounts in your name, trust accounts in your name, portfolios in your name, and you have grown accustomed to a certain style of life. Let us then perform a little magic upon you and remove your memory of who you are in this lifetime. Take away the name that you have, the memory of your parents and your associates, where you've lived, all of the things about your identity. Take away from you as well your driver's license with your picture on it, Social Security card, all other forms of identification, your ATM card. And let us put you to sleep by the side of the road and have you wake up the next morning. Now, you are friendless. You are an orphan, a waif in the world, with nothing more than the clothes on your back, without resources. You don't remember a single phone number of a single friend or relative. You don't remember all of the other wealth and history of your life stream. Can you see that in such a situation, you wouldn't be in a position to tap any of those resources that lawfully belonged to you? Nor would you know of the love of those who cared for you. You can carry this analogy on in whatever way you would wish. The important thing to realize is that, in fact, this is the plight of almost the entire human race. They have forgotten not only, well, let us put this differently. Some indeed do have an acceptance of the fact that they have lived other lifetimes. Some may have rejected that concept, forgotten all about the time before their birth in this embodiment, and believe, astonishingly, that they themselves blinked into existence out of nothing, that they've come into existence from the first cry of their newborn form, that they will live for a time, eking out whatever kind of life they can here in this world during their lifetime. And if that's what they have believed about themselves, they might well believe that the time will come when they will yet again blink out of existence and return to the oblivion from whence they appear to have appeared. For others, of course, there's a whole range of options. However, there are hardly any among the entire billions of life waves upon this earth who have a living, breathing, awakened connection and tethering to the selfhood that they have always been in eternity, that mighty individuality that they are in the presence. This afternoon, we defined what is meant by an axiom. There is another very, very useful axiom that may explain the concept of karmic return, but also explains a very important principle having to do with all sorts of memory. It is an impersonal principle that applies, which goes like this: all impulses of consciousness, qualified consciousness, qualified life, return back to the central point of their origin, and not even a solitary atom ever escapes. When these impulses of consciousness return, they carry with them that which is known as a life record. It is an intangible something that is nevertheless quite real. That means that there is the qualification of energy that took place, the event that took place, the picture of it, the resident consciousness that was within it. All such impulses return back to the source from which they have come. Now, before the fall of the mankind of Earth, this meant that all impulses of consciousness truly began, for our purposes, in the blessed heart of the mighty I Am presence. They may have come forth from that mighty presence, going out in the ascended master octave and back again, or they may have come forth from the mighty I Am presence and descended down one or more realms of creation, one or more of the planes, gone out into life, and then return back to the point of origin from which they have come. This means that for that individual mighty I Am presence, there is an unbroken stream of awareness that contains every qualification of life by that presence which has ever been sent forth into the universe that is good. And that includes all that has been sent forth by the outer self in incarnation, even since the fall of man. Let me repeat that. All the impulses that are good and harmonious that have gone forth from the embodied life stream that are in any way wholesome and harmonious, however innocent and benign they might seem to be, they have all gone forth, going out in the mental, going out in the emotional, going out in the physical plane, as well as in the higher realms. And since they have retained the original stamp of purity and love that the mighty presence put upon them, as they have come back, they have not remained permanently in the outer self, but they have migrated imperceptibly back up into the heart of the mighty I Am presence, where they take up their place in the vast concentric spheres of the glorious causal body that are the bands of color that you see surrounding the electronic body. Because it is very interesting to note how this occurs. That creation is of such a refined texture, such a fine particle size, if you will, that it passes quite freely through even the denser levels of misqualification, of mind and memory, and so forth. This principle was taught in the East in the various incarnations of the Lord Vishnu, the incarnations of the avatars of Vishnu. And one of those incarnations was symbolized by a very small mammal, little tiny field mouse, that was taken to represent this principle of the building up of the causal body. How could it mean that at all? In this sense, if you have a granary or a corn crib or some other storage of foodstuffs and grain, and you are not careful, right before your eyes, the quantity of grain that has been stored will seem to diminish on its own. It will seem to get less and less without ever noticing the reason why. The theory being that it's because of this incarnation of Vishnu that is secretly secreting away that fruit of the harvest of life and taking it back up into the level of the God presence. Jesus taught the same thing in the parable of the talents, when the unwise or the foolish servant complained that God reaped where he had not sown, taking up that abundance that others seem to have produced, not realizing that the impulse of that good began at the level of the God presence. So as long as there was not a dual self, all was well. Everything went all the way to the mighty I Am presence and took up its position scientifically, arranging itself in those great vibrating, living, breathing, qualified expressions of the presence. Parenthetically, it also happens to be true that while this was the fruit of action, while it was that return of that impulse of consciousness, it is also true that each of those contained within it the memory or the life record of the original impulse of consciousness that had been sent forth, most importantly by the mighty I Am presence, as well as all of the expressions of the heart of that presence in whatever realm the presence was operating. As long as this was the case, that awareness, that sum total of consciousness in the expansion of the causal body, was a collective state of awareness that was all constantly requalifying the new flow of life that was always being sent forth by the presence. And so the presence was always, even in outer expression, not in the innermost levels of the great I Am, but in its outermost expression, it was always the sum of all of the good that it had ever released before. And naturally, all of that was at the fingertip availability of control and ready to be energized again, ready to have additional life qualified into that causal body. And this new life then sent forth, already impressed with the virtue of that which had gone on before. Can you begin to realize the stature of such a being that bore the impress of its own record of stepping forth from the great central sun, knowing every moment of eternity that it had ever experienced, remembering with a photographic memory that never forgot anything, that always had that memory not crowding in and conflicting, but always available when needed. This was the plan to be throughout the entire incarnation. And it was only after the four lower bodies redirected their attention away from the mighty I Am presence, and in that chose to misqualify the life of that presence that was entrusted into the care and keeping of those four lower bodies. This misqualification necessarily imprisoned the sparkling nature of the light and life that was flowing through those bodies, blocked off the outpouring of its radiance with that discord that became darkness. And that discord was sent out into creation. Sent out where? Into the mind, feeling, and physical planes of this earth. And according to the axiom we just learned about before, all impulses of consciousness return back to the central point that sent them out without ever a solitary atom escaping that immutable law. And in this case, we can ask ourselves the question, these discordant thoughts and feelings, where did those impulses of consciousness originate? Did they originate in the mighty presence or the Christ presence? No, indeed. No, they originated instead in these outer vehicles. And so, like birds homing back to their point of origin, all of those misqualifications eventually migrated back home and took up their dubious position around the central light of the heart in each of the bodies. This process was insidious in that it occurred imperceptibly to the outer consciousness for the most part. The dimming of the light, the opaquing of the greater light occurred so gradually. And the returning of that darkened substance as karma was itself, unfortunately, somewhat familiar to the consciousness that had generated it. And over time, it built up that which is called the accretion. Almost like you start out with minerals that are dissolved in water. But as that water has more and more mineral salts built into it, more calcium, more hard water deposits, eventually that water reaches a point of saturation at which it can't hold anymore in solution. And when that happens, the sediment begins to crystallize and form scale. And that is what happened and accounts for the phenomenon of the dual self, the outer self. And perhaps the worst of all of the karma wasn't necessarily the pain or the suffering of that returning karma. The most tragic penalty of that returning karma is that it cut off the divine memory of the mighty presence. It sealed out those higher realms and sealed in the consciousness of the outer self. When beloved Saint Germain, as Plato, wished to come up with an example of what the human consciousness is like, he chose the example of a cave. A cave is a darkened enclosure with just a few dubious openings to the outside world. And that is the nature of the human self, the human memory body, as we call it. And by the way, it is only referred to as the memory body in that sense. And the only reason that it is a separate set of memories is because they can't travel any higher. The law of the being of the realm of the Christ will not permit them to enter into that realm. So they are a de facto form of memory. They are a counterfeit memory. But as that ego builds up over time, just as we said a few minutes ago that the causal body creates a sum total of illustrious, magnificent consciousness in its own right, so all of these accreted records of misqualification produce a phantasm, a phenomenon which Daniel called the beast that was not, but yet is. That abomination of desolation standing in the holy place where it ought not. No better characterization could there ever be of the human ego, the beast that was not, because it is not a God reality, it doesn't exist in the mind of God, but yet is, in the sense that it does have a temporary existence in this world of form. And it is occupying as an abomination what should be that holy, consecrated, sacred chalice, that grail consciousness of the four lower bodies. And so mankind are like these great princes and princelings of the glorious mighty presence, all of whom are bereft of memory and bereft, therefore, of drawing upon that divine inheritance which is theirs. They are truly an orphaned race, cast up on the shores of life here, eking out an existence of survival that you know only too well. Here is how beloved Saint Germain described this process some time ago. It was on the occasion when he showed to Godfrey certain records that were tens of thousands of years old. And as Godfrey looked at these records, lo and behold, he was able to read them just as naturally as you would read a newspaper today in your own native language. He was very astonished at this because it was so natural and spontaneous. And Saint Germain explained that all Saint Germain had to do was to reestablish the flow of life through the record with the life record of that embodiment. And that is why divine memory is such a power. It is a remembering. You are putting back together, reestablishing that living, breathing nerve that connects the waking consciousness with the record, the life record, in the mighty I Am presence, in the causal body rings of the mighty I Am presence. He explained the matter of knowing God and knowing God's universe and creation is simply a process of actually contacting the life record that flows within every form. Every form within creation contains life. And within the light emanation of that form, there is recorded its entire past, which anyone may train themselves to discover and understand if they be willing to give their attention and time to the discipline necessary to still the confusion of the outer activity of day-to-day life. This is an eternal record within all things and has existed from the beginning. Of course, he is making that distinction between those things that are part of perfection and purity and not those things that are of the mortal. He went on to say, in past ages, all humanity manifest perfection in every way. This perfection of the entire human race has been chronicled as the time of the Garden of Eden, meaning divine wisdom. Unfortunately, as the conscious attention and the outer activity of the mind was permitted to focus on the world of the physical senses, the divine wisdom, the all-knowing activity of consciousness, became clouded over or covered over, and the cosmic divine plan of the individual's life stream was then submerged. I might point out to you that this is one of the razor's edge, double-edged swords in this world today, our modern world, where you find those life streams whose every waking moment is devoted to prying out of nature her innermost secrets in the physical world. They are taking their crystal cord energy and driving it into the earth. They are driving it out. Part of this is due to a very, again, another subtle double-edged point, and that is a lustfulness for knowledge, which goes by the name of curiosity. Curiosity is not the heart wanting to be in contact with God or remember God. Curiosity is almost like the 7 deadly sins. It is an appetite of the mind instead of the gluttony of the belly. But it is just as much a gluttony of the mind. And there it is a compelling desire to know the things of the outer physical world, to catalog them, to describe them, to drive in and wrench from nature her secrets, whether she wishes to reveal them or not. And it is a very tragic thing when people become so infatuated, whether it is in studying the life cycle of a sandfly or invertebrates or anything that is done with that mania of a fixation. And this goes on across the world, and it is symptomatic of the fall of man that looks out, and out. And by the way, that just doesn't apply to physical sciences or those kinds of things. It is equally as true if it is curious about what is going on in the mental plane or the emotional plane. Those who are curious and have a yen for all of the glamour and silvery glitter and fascination of the intermediate planes are just as earthbound as those who insist upon spending the vast majority of their life's energies driving their life out and down and into the earth. This produces this fall of mankind and doesn't leave room for what is referred to here both as divine wisdom, which is the all-knowing activity of consciousness, that same infinite, universal, one mind of God that knows all intuitively, holds all in consciousness simultaneously, and operates out of a sense of love. We are fortunate indeed to have in beloved Saint Germain and others of the Ascended Masters, scientists of the spirit, who do understand that when science is used to further the purposes of love, to ennoble mankind for the purposes of good, and it is used as a tool, then it can be in its rightful place. And this is what was intended in the divine plan. The outer bodies were intended to be utensils. They were intended to be a very glorious living organism that was a mechanism as a vehicle for the use of the heart flame and of the presence. They were not intended ever to be an end in and of themselves. They weren't intended to be such a luxuriant temptation that, like Narcissus, the entire human race would recline luxuriantly by the side of a calm pool, gaze rapturously into the reflection of their own image in the water, and fall into an infatuated love with their own reflection in the realm of matter. But that is unfortunately what has taken place. And the result of this is that the cosmic divine plan has become submerged. And with it, the awareness of perfection and the awareness of the God control over all of form was hidden and forgotten. And thus, the entire human race has become sense conscious instead of God conscious. And they have continued to recreate and to manifest that upon which their attention has been so determinately riveted, and which they thought and meditated mostly upon. No one can escape and claim ignorance of this, for this was a deliberate and conscious choice, whereby mankind literally turned their back away from the sun of their own presence, away from the perfection and the dominion with which the one Father, Mother, God had endowed them in the beginning, thereby creating their own experiences of lack and limitation and discord of every sort. All of these limitations are the result of the misuse of free will. Thereby, human beings compel themselves to live within their own creations. And here is where the turning point arrives, and it calls to mind the exhortation and the lamentation of Elijah to mankind from this altar just a few weeks ago, calling for mankind to awaken to the light of their presence, to turn back consciously and to once more focus their heart's devotion and their mind's attention on their royal beginnings, God, the great source of all. And when this redirection of the attention occurs, then mankind will begin to remember that which he once was and which he may become again as he elects to focus upon the great cosmic blueprint of himself. Can you see how priceless would be this gift of divine memory? Of course, in this case, the Ascended Masters and your own I Am Presence are not all that concerned with the ebb and flow of past incarnations. What they are concerned with are the qualities, the life records that are reposited in the glorious bands of the causal body. This, too, is a vehicle that you may begin to put on. Its purposes are many, in addition to that faculty of memory. It stores not only the record of the events that took place in eternity, and in the whole saga of the Godhead charioteer of your mighty presence, it also contains the impetus, the qualified energy that has come forth into manifestation and returned to the causal body. That is, in a sense, not exactly the same as the crystal clear, unqualified, pure consciousness of life that flows through the crystal cord initially. Initially, that comes to your heart flame in each of those vehicles in an unqualified state, ready and susceptible to every nuance of creative thought and feeling and so forth. The nature of the causal body is that it has already received that stamp of qualification. It is, building on what we were talking about this afternoon, it is a part of that expansion of the one through the individual I am presence of the consciousness of the Godhead. It is that which you in your presence, whether at the level of the presence, the causal body, or the outer self, it is that which has been externalized, which has been expanded from within out. And it is, in every case, an attainment that has been won by you. Once it has been won, it makes up what Jesus called those treasures that are stored in heaven, where moth does not eat and rust does not corrupt. There, and they can never be taken from you. No life stream should ever be tempted to feel that somehow or another the service that they have rendered to life has gone to naught, that it has been wasted, that all of that effort has been eroded and washed away and was of no avail. For everything that your life stream has ever done of good is still present for you and will be for all eternity. One of the other aspects of this glorious memory is that you should not have the sense that when you wish to draw upon your causal body, that the energy of that causal body, that qualified energy, is temporarily emptied out of the causal body and goes forth in that sense once again. What was the axiom that we established this afternoon? It was that at every level of the Godhead never ceases to be that which it is at that level. It does not descend in itself out of that level. Rather, what it does is it sends forth from itself and streams forth out of itself a new, fresh creation, a new, what the philosophers of the Brotherhood call a new hypostasis. How does this work in this case of memory? There was another axiom that was a kind of, I'm not sure where this was first given. It's kind of a layman's use of the term that a translation of the parable of the talents goes like this: them that has gets. Found it very interesting that when the Lord, in the case of the talents, took away the talents from the foolish servant who hid them in a napkin, he didn't give them to the one that had the next middle number of talents. He gave them to the one that had the most talents. And the reason for that, the law behind that, is that in the causal body, that is qualified attainment. That is qualified virtue. Life that is set zinging, resonating, vibrating, living. And it is a life record that continues to radiate its life record. All of the blue band radiating that life record. All of the pink band radiating that life record. Always radiating it, constantly radiating it, constantly emitting it forth. And what this means is that when your mighty I Am presence wishes to send forth light once again, in addition to that which is already within the individualization of the mighty I Am presence, which you will discover this week, in addition to that, that mighty I Am presence has available to it the whole paintbrush or the whole paint box of the causal body. And it is able to take the crystal cord energy of its own life stream and daub it into the various bands of the causal body. If it needs more power, it adds fresh life to the blue band. And the blue band that is there shakes hands with those new electrons, and it literally imparts to them its tincture, its virtue, its blueness, its momentum on the will. And it is this fresh new spring of life charged with those causal body virtues that streams forth out into the outer realms of creation, leaving the causal body as full as ever it was, with not the slightest scintilla of depletion. This is called the principle of undiminished giving, and it allows for the exponential multiplication of your life stream, your attainment, once that activation of the causal body truly begins. For that new life goes forth, and of course, it performs its perfect work, and then flies home, back to the central sun of the heart flame, the little miniature central sun of the heart of love, of the individualization of the mighty I Am presence that sent it forth in the first place. Impulses of consciousness returning to the central point that brought them out. And then that process goes on and on and on. So in all that givingness, there is never the slightest depletion, but only a greater multiplication and magnification of the ability to bestow the love of the presence in the infinite variety of ways that are there within the glorious causal body. There are other functions of this causal body as a microcosm of the great macrocosm of the causal body rings of the great central sun, the realms of divine being that come forth from out the realm of the one, whereby your own causal body develops the capacity to step down and interpret and differentiate so many of these attributes of the allness of that presence. The wonderful thing about the causal body, a principle which is also true of the human consciousness, is that wherever the heart moves, the causal body goes with it. Of course, that's true of karma as well. There used to be a cartoon character many years ago in the Little Abner series, and wherever he traveled, he had a little black cloud with lightning bolts over his head, and he was always plagued with bad luck because no matter where he traveled, that black cloud traveled with him. Well, that is a perversion of this very principle. So wherever your consciousness goes, wherever that presence goes, that great spherical awareness of that causal body goes with it. We don't have time tonight to explain how it is that everybody's causal bodies don't bump into one another, how they overlap with each other like waves on the ocean, passing through each other but continuing on their way, like the way in which even galaxies move through each other, and depending on how the force of gravity attracts them both, either move on as two independent galaxies or perhaps recombine, but never really smashing into each other. Even so, there is no conflict with these expressions of those glorious causal bodies. For us this evening and for the rest of our time together, the important thing to remember is that there is this divine memory. And what a power it is when you are reattached, remembered to that memory. For then you know who you are. Then you are able to observe with bemusement the antics of your own outer self, to look on with a certain detachment from within that plane of the causal body, as from the coign of vantage. You are able to look out and have the correct co-measurement about what is important in life, what the mighty I Am Presence cares about, what the mighty I Am Presence does not care about, and perhaps most importantly of all, in this way, you are no longer amalgamated into the mass karma of what is going to happen or what may happen, or good, bad, or indifferent, to this world and all of the billions of life waves who are kind of all amalgamated together, jumbled up in one another's karma. You are no longer joined at the hip to whatever might be that fate that awaits mankind in the short or the long term. And that includes the so-called pleasures and good, so-called good things of this world, as well as the so-called bad things. For the good things can be just as much a glamour, a fascination, a hypnotic, trance-like state, a waking dream state, caught up in all of the things of this world. You're no longer marching to that rhythm. Instead, you are marching to the glorious cadences and rhythms of your mighty I Am Presence and the many spiritual cadences of that glorious causal body. As that restoration occurs, you will be unmoved by outer things, and you will instead facilitate your mighty I Am Presence as the unmoved mover of your life, the prime mover of your events, taking authority over your life, moving things forward in your life. And you will have your feet firmly planted in that realm of the mighty presence and its memory of the causal body, knowing that to be the true home, the true identity that is calling you home to itself. When you do return to those realms, this divine memory will come flooding back to you. When you enter the Ascended Master Octave, you're not going to be like Magellan or even Christopher Columbus, discovering some foreign land, some untrodden territory. From all points of space, recollections are going to occur. Reunions are going to occur. That sense of having returned home at long last from an almost indefinite pilgrimage in this world, that is going to occur. The innocence and the wholesomeness of your childlike nature that is native to your own mighty I Am presence, that will also come back. And you will be glad to be that selfless, innocent, divine man-child that all of the Ascended Masters are. It's quite an amazing thing to observe in all of them. For all of their magnificence, they are very self-effacing. They're very unaware of themselves, more concerned with every other part of life. It is going to be a return to that Edenic consciousness, where life is wholesome in every possible way. I've asked our technicians to prepare a musical meditation that ties you into that higher memory of your own God presence that is just beyond conscious awareness, something that you will be able to tie into. No, it's not Barbra Streisand singing the siren song about memories, which is the sentimental turning of the old photo albums of this embodiment. It's not that sugary sentimentality. It is a sunny Olympic type of memory that calls to mind that original time of eternal youthfulness and childhood innocence and purity and spontaneity that is native to your own mighty I Am presence and not just to your own Christ presence. And as you do try to remember, then follow.